Um, my name is Stefan Kolleber. I'm Chief Partnerships Officer at Bonart. It's my pleasure to again welcome you all at today's webinar, Europe in Focus, which destinations are attracting global students. This is part of our Global Student Flows quarterly briefings. Some of you may know if you're attending these regular market updates regularly. Today, we're going to focus on Europe, as the title says, which is based on more of a general trend that we have spotted and analyzed based on the recent data and trends in international education and student sector, where we are witnessing some shifts from the global student mobility perspective. More will be presented on that based on hard data and analysis by my colleague Sara Verkinova, our head of international education at Bonart. I will give her floor in a minute. Before I do, just a housekeeping and a bit about us. First of all, I encourage everyone to ask and post your questions or comments in a Q&A. So ideally use Q&A for that at the end of the session. Once Sarah finishes her presentation, we will be able to respond to a few of them at least live. For all the other questions, we will follow up later after the session. Also, recording and slides will be distributed and shared after the webinar to all the webinar registrants. And of course, for those of you who would like to discuss a bit more in more detail about what's going on in the sector and perhaps how Bonart can be of help, feel free to connect with us after this session. One more thing about us and the platform. Again, for those who have perhaps not come across Bonart much recently, we're a market data and strategic advisory firm actively involved in international education for 18 years now, basically with a global scope. Our expertise is market data research and recruitment solutions. We work with governments, associations, institutions, as well as investors in student education and student sector. One of our core things or expertise is tracking international student mobility flows, and this way being able to identify emerging trends and growth opportunities for all the international education sector stakeholders. Our platform is something that we have developed relatively recently, at least to this latest version. Over the past year, we have developed a set of tools and analytics to benchmarking analytics to help institutions mostly navigate the increasingly complex international education landscape. And major innovation is, as I mentioned, the interactive data platform that merges both enrollment and student visa data with detailed source market data and insights. The platform, as I indicated, is designed to help institutions identify high potential markets and validate their target countries with reliable data. And final note, we're doing this webinar series. Feel free to join the future ones as well, mostly with intention to support institutions in making timely recruitment decisions, as well as in optimizing resource allocation, rather than waiting perhaps years in some cases for final enrollment data. So I think that's it. Thanks for your attention. And now I'm pleased to give floor to my colleague, Sarah.
Thank you very much, Stefan. And once again, welcome everyone. We are again happy to for joining us today as part of this webinar series. We are running on a quarterly basis where we are delivering the latest insights into the student visa issuance among the big four destinations and then New Zealand. And I will probably just repeat, as we always do during the start of the webinar, that I think at this point we all understand that the student visa data is now a critical indicator for everyone, with considering the fact of the announcement, regulatory changes in the major study destinations. And therefore, also our goal is to really help you to understand the trends, approval rates, and what they suggest about the future enrollment. So just really briefly, as part of this quarterly webinar series, as mentioned by Stefan, today we will cover two main areas. So firstly, we will do our regular update on the big four destinations and New Zealand in terms of the student visa issued on more macro level. So we'll not go necessarily into individual study destination, and then we will look closer on Europe as a study destination to really understand like how the mobility is shifting and where these students are going according to latest enrollment trends. So just giving you a little bit of understanding on what enrollment and the destination data we are currently tracking. So in terms of the enrollment, we are covering 21 destinations. And for the student visa data, there is the traditional methodology behind when we are looking into offshore applicants, main applicants, and no extensions. So without further ado, let's dive into the Q2 2025 update on the student visa issuance. So on the following slide, you can see the most up-to-date data on the performance on the major international study destinations using the student visa grants data as a key indicator, as I outlined before. Giving you a note related to United States, because the most recent official data is available until May 2025, with a June 2025 figure still pending government release. But taking into account the impact of government interventions, we estimate that approximately 60% less visas or F1 student visas were issued to international students in the second quarter cumulatively. Given that this quarter typically account for around 40% of all visas issued annually, such a decline expected to have a really significant impact, or as educators you already saw that in your fall 2025 enrollment numbers. When looking into UK, you might notice that the UK issued during the first half of the year 104,000 student visas. Overall, and in contrast to the decline seen across most of the destinations, New Zealand held relatively stable performance, issuing only 3% fewer student visa between January and June 2025 compared to the same period of 2024. And I think what is particularly interesting is where this demand is coming from towards the New Zealand. And the largest number of applications we saw coming from China, India, and Philippines. Among these, China and the Philippines stand out with the approval rates, something about 90%. On the other hand, I'm sorry, India show a lower approval rate at 83%. So while the overall volume in New Zealand, for instance, remains stable, the composition and approval patterns tell more nuanced story about where is the future growth, or on the other hand, the pressure points that might actually emerge in the coming future. But when having a look at the year-on-year performance of individual study destinations when comparing Q2 2024 to Q2 2025, perhaps let's start with Australia, because after their earlier declines, the market seems to have found its footing with a more stable performance during the second quarter of 2025. However, I think it's important to know that the growth was mainly concentrated in the higher education segment, with the most source markets contributing, except China, actually, which remained flat during the second quarter of 2025. And the standout was Nepal, recording the largest increases, followed by India and Bangladesh in this particular segment. For the US, the picture is even more concerning, as I outlined a little bit earlier, we anticipated that there was a 60% decline in the Q2 2025. And there was a brief moment of kind of optimism in April when consulates reopened and additional visa slots for international students, and these became available, which actually led to a small uptick. But in the May, issuance fell again sharply, down by 22%, which was predominantly led by drops in India, China, South Korea, and Vietnam. So we are talking about those big four largest source markets for the US. Finally, the UK stand out as a bright spot, and it has now delivered 2 consecutive quarters of growth, continuing to benefit from shift away from other destinations. So the momentum is being fueled predominantly by India, Nepal, and Nigeria, which together cumulatively grew by 10,000 more student visa issued to students from these markets compared to the same period of 2024. We already touched base a little bit on student visa grant rates, and you can see here on this slide that in Australia, after a peak in 2024, grant rates have softened again in early 2025, dropping back to 82% in Q2 of this year. And while most source markets remain relatively stable, volatility, particularly in markets like Pakistan, actually continues to create even uncertainty for institutions. New Zealand has largely maintained stable, though rates slipping slightly to 84% in Q2 2025 after a strong showing earlier this year. And for most key markets, approval levels remained relatively healthy. You can also notice that UK continues to stand out as a most consistent performer during the first quarter of 2025, with the grant rates holding steady 88% throughout even early 2025, and this sustained trends provide reassurance for both institutions and the prospective students at the moment. But I think for a majority of us, it's still important and also interesting to see like what markets are still growing in these destinations. So you can see that in a Q2 of 2025, overall the data highlights a clear story, right? So South Asia is the main growth engine across multiple destinations, especially we are talking about Nepal and India. Australia's growth or stability is being powered by South Asia as well, led strongly by Nepal, which continues to be a standout market, reinforcing Australia's strong reliance on the region. In New Zealand, the largest growth was seen in Bangladesh, along with the gains from Sri Lanka or the Philippines. While in smaller and absolute numbers, their markets are really highlighting a broadening of New Zealand's recruitment base in Asia. Regarding the UK continues to benefit from the scale with the largest absolute growth across destinations, and India led, and this was also followed closely by Nepal and Nigeria. But when giving this and providing you the perspective of the source markets and the distribution and the growth among the big four and New Zealand, I think it's also important to take a step back and examine like really broader shifts in the student flows and the preferences. So again, just to reiterate, you can see that Nepal stands out with a promising performance in the Q2 of 2025, emerging as one of the most dynamic growth markets across multiple destinations. India, on the other hand, showed like a mixed pattern. So you can see growth in Australia and the UK, but it continued declines in the other destinations, particularly in Canada. Nigeria also recorded mixed result, while performance varied by destinations and continues to perform quite strongly for the UK. And we also saw solid and steady growth from Bangladesh, South Korea, and stable performance from Indonesia. Kind of reinforcing their roles and as a reliable source market for many of the destinations. But I think that it's important to note also what is the impact, right? So what we know from the data. Already in 2024, 285,000 students have chosen alternative destinations. In 2025, it is estimated that at least 165,000 students will change their preferred destinations away from Big Four, which is like really enormous number. And taking into account various policy shifts and data trends, I think it is reasonable to assume that the Big Four are now losing market share at the rates of at least 100,000 students annually. So these aren't a small shift, they represent a really significant market reallocation. And today's students, what we know, are increasingly prioritizing the study destinations that really offer a combination of quality education, the affordability, the safety, and the work rights during and after the graduation. So Big Four have traditionally delivered on these criteria until now, right? So you have cities like Singapore, Tokyo, Hong Kong, and Malaysia, which are emerging as alternatives. But also, on the other hand, their capacity might not be sufficient to absorb the full growth of this redirected demand from these markets. Then, of course, there are coming into consideration the other destinations like within the Europe, like Germany, France, Spain, and Italy, which appear to be well positioned to fill this gap of these students. So these countries now offer many of the same advantages that once made Canada or Australia attractive in the past, including like relatively affordability, safety, and the strong academic offerings, along with a kind of greater policy openness and a housing potential for international students. And this is what brings us to Europe as a study destination. And when we are looking into Europe a little bit more closely,